Hi, I'm Dominic Barton, studying towards an online MA in Public History and Heritage at the University of Derby. The aim of this paper is to highlight the problems caused by national government ownership of cultural heritage, discussing the weaknesses inherent in current governance, and exploring ways in which governing bodies could improve policies and processes to better protect cultural heritage of importance to all of humanity. Throughout history and across the world, contemporary government policy has dictated how cultural heritage is treated on a regional and national level, whether that's the Ottoman government allowing the removal of the Parthenon marbles from Athens, the more recent destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan by the Taliban in Afghanistan, or any other from an extremely long list of examples. By nature, governing bodies, their priorities and their policies are temporary and constantly changing. However, the way in which these ever-changing policies affect heritage can be long-lasting or even permanent, causing loss, change, damage, and destruction. With this in mind, it's vital that heritage of importance to all of humanity is protected on an international level, rising above regional or temporary interests. Risks to heritage practices and sites need to be identified early and mitigated appropriately, and there needs to be effective enforcement in place to ensure that sites and practices in danger are adequately protected. This paper will focus on the example of the Buddhas of Bamiyan, part of the UNESCO inscribed site of the Bamiyan Valley in Afghanistan, to investigate the limitations of existing oversight bodies and discuss potential improvements to more effectively protect heritage sites of international interest from damage by regional and national policy. The Buddhas of Bamiyan were two large statues located in the Bamiyan Valley in central Afghanistan. The Buddhas were sited on niches carved into cliffs which, along with the wider area, contain a large number of galleries containing artwork and carvings, along with sites of worship such as monasteries. The oldest of these date from the 3rd century, ranging all the way up to the 13th century. The site is important to a variety of groups, with the range in age of artifacts showcasing development of Buddhist practices, with a 2nd century Buddhist monastery and as a previously important Buddhist pilgrimage destination, and of artistic influences from Gupta India to Sasanian Iran, alongside Hellenistic artistic styles. Alongside this, the position of the Bamiyan Valley on the Silk Road, an important historical trade route linking India and China, means that a wide variety of cultures influence the local culture through exchanges of goods and ideas of merchants from as far afield as China, Central Asia, India, and Rome. This makes the area important to the wider Buddhist and artistic communities, as well as the importance to local communities in understanding how the interchange of cultures on the Silk Road affected their own local culture. In 1996, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan and introduced new policies based around the strict interpretation of Islamic Sharia law, and in 2001, the edict of Mullah Muhammad Omar stated that the Buddhas would be destroyed. The justification for this was stated as, because these idols have been gods of the infidels, and these are respected even now and perhaps may be turned into gods again, the real God is only Allah, and all of the false gods should be removed. 3 days later, on the 1st of March 2001, demolition works began. This statement shows that in claiming ownership of the site, the Taliban were also claiming ownership of the heritage discourse by claiming valid grounds for destroying the statues and repositioning the narrative as one of the Taliban correcting the story and ensuring that a false narrative is avoided in the future. As current controllers of the site, the Taliban were able to take precedence over any other groups with a claim to ownership, both locally and internationally, and treat the site as they and they alone saw fit. In both the local and international context, destruction of the Buddhas serves to disconnect groups from their cultural heritage in terms of not just the physical structures, but also the associated practices and beliefs. Following the overthrow of the Taliban government by an international coalition led by the US, the cultural landscape and archaeological remains of the Bamiyan Valley in Afghanistan was inscribed as a cultural site in 2003, fulfilling 5 of the inscription criteria, and it added to the list of World Heritage in danger. 5 criteria for inscription were met by the site. These were representing a masterpiece of human creative genius, exhibiting an important interchange of human values over a span of time or within a cultural area of the world on developments in architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning or landscape design, bearing a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or has disappeared, being an outstanding example of a type of building, architectural or technological ensemble or landscape which illustrates a significant stage in human history, and finally, being directly or tangibly associated with events or living traditions, with ideas or with beliefs, with artistic and literary works of outstanding universal significance. The rationale for inscription of this site are valid because of the importance of the site as a part of the Silk Road, reflecting its significance to a wide variety of cultures over a long period of time. Alongside this, being a large-scale Buddhist site, although there is no Buddhist presence residing in the region now, the site is of great significance to Buddhism on an international level. It's also of local cultural significance, providing evidence of traditional land use. The artistic and architectural significance of the site also provides a strong argument for inscription. Clearly, these reasons for inscription are not new, and this raises questions around whether UNESCO could or should have acted sooner to safeguard the site, with the point at which the risk profile of the site changed significantly, perhaps being a factor to prompt action. The site was included on the in danger list at the same time as inscription onto the World Heritage List due to the fragility of the site caused by abandonment, military action, and the destruction caused by the Taliban's actions. Again, this reinforces the view that had action been taken sooner, there would have been greater opportunity to protect the site before this damage had been done. UNESCO inscription has meant that a coherent safeguarding plan has been in place for this site since 2003, along with relevant funding. Alongside this, a management plan was created to guide the longer-term protection and use of the site. Several projects have been completed since inscription onto the World Heritage List aimed at protecting the site. These include consolidating the physical landscape, such as fragile cliffs, protecting artwork, and training local communities to manage and protect the site. UNESCO has ensured that local craftspeople have been involved in managing the site, including Afghan engineers and archaeologists, as well as local labourers. This has generated income for the local area. The higher levels of governance and funding alongside these projects have been of benefit and led to consideration of a roadmap to removal from the in danger list. Again, had UNESCO been able to act earlier, it could have been possible to enact measures to protect the site more effectively. While it's accepted that physical protection is likely to have been difficult, softer methods of influencing could have been available. The site continues to face significant challenges. While the 2 Buddhas were destroyed in 2001, much of the broader site remains intact, such as the Buddhist monastery and the wider landscape. However, a large portion of the remains are in a fragile state and still require protection. Since the Taliban retook Afghanistan in 2021, they are now back in control of the site, which reduces the influence of the international community around its protection. The site is now used as a tourist attraction, but under the control of the Taliban, this becomes a tool to legitimize the regime and both justify and celebrate the actions they took in destroying the statues. This shows the uncertainty brought through governmental control over heritage sites of international significance, with policy in this case changing from destruction to protection and finally to use as a political tool, depending on the priorities of each successive controlling government. A clear problem with the current approach of UNESCO to inscribing new sites is that the site must be nominated by the nation in which it resides. This means that only those nations with an interest in preserving cultural heritage are likely to request inscription, and also that where inscription is requested, it's likely to be for sites that align with the priorities of the current government, rather than taking a more inclusive and longer-term view of cultural value. Another issue demonstrated by the Bamiyan case is one of timing. Inscription only occurred in 2003, 2 years after the destruction of the Buddhas. This represents a failure in terms of protection of cultural heritage and points to a weakness in either risk assessment frameworks or the ability to act where significant risks are noted. Improved identification of sites becoming at risk, along with a proactive approach to inscribed sites, would be helpful as a foundation for processes to avoid or reduce the likelihood of destruction of heritage. International criminal law incorporates the concept of cultural property. The 1954 Hague Convention states that damage to cultural property belonging to any people whatsoever means damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind, since each people makes its contribution to the culture of the world. This clearly links cultural property with wider international ownership, rather than simply regarding local ownership as the sole concern. Following on from this, the 1972 UNESCO Convention introduces the criterion of outstanding universal value in assessing sites. This shows that wider ownership of cultural sites has been discussed and enshrined in law for many years. Key to protecting heritage of universal value, however, is the ability to enforce the conventions. Legal precedent has been set by the successful case through the International Criminal Court, or ICC, against Ahmad al-Faqi al-Mahdi for attacks on religious buildings and monuments in Mali. The destruction of cultural property can be viewed as a crime against humanity and successfully prosecuted as such. This presents the possibility that motivation to destroy objects could be discouraged through legal channels. However, the coverage of the ICC is limited to member states, which means that outside of these states, it's unlikely that the body would influence the decision-making process around treatment of heritage to any great extent. Alongside this, the case against al-Mahdi was relatively simple, including the fact that he pleaded guilty and submitted to representatives of the court. It has been argued that it seems unlikely that, given the limited resources of the court, higher profile, less cooperative defendants or more complex cases would be successfully pursued on a consistent basis. This, along with the limited geographic coverage of the ICC, means that it's unlikely to have the reach and profile to affect attitudes of a large enough group. Simply put, it seems doubtful that the ICC has the necessary deterrent or reach to outweigh the perceived benefits to the aggressor of destroying cultural property. The success of the ICC in securing convictions in member states is a proof point that destruction of heritage can be held to account in international law. However, given that evidence suggests that the ICC is less likely to pursue convictions for more difficult cases where the defendant is less minded to cooperate, alongside the fact that only states signing up to the ICC are covered, means that in the case of the Buddhas of Bamiyan, the ICC would be unable to act. Creation of an effectively resourced supranational body without gaps in geographic coverage could remedy this and ensure that cultural heritage is protected whether or not the nation is signed up to the ICC. This is particularly important given that the government of a state can decide not to be part of the UN or ICC. Hence, without a supranational national body, the risk of temporary government policy permanently affecting heritage sites remains. All of this points to a series of problems in protecting heritage of international importance. Governments cannot be trusted to consistently act responsibly as priorities and resources change over time. Within the current governance framework, UNESCO is unable to act in an independent or timely manner to proactively protect heritage sites before risks materialise. And finally, the International Criminal Court is limited by constraints around coverage and the resources required to pursue more difficult and complex cases. To address these issues, focus on three key areas would be of use, paying specific attention to protection of sites at high risk. These would focus on creation of an effective heritage toolkit, including enterprise risk management principles to identify sites at greater risk early, accelerated and proactive inscription where needed, and an effective arsenal of measures to ensure that regional and national powers treat heritage in an acceptable manner. A refresh of the UNESCO risk assessment criteria to implement enterprise risk management techniques in identifying and monitoring sites requiring additional protection would allow a clear view of emerging risks, which would provide a platform for more proactive protection of heritage sites. This should start with a clear risk appetite statement, documenting clear principles around the trigger points for a heritage site to be proactively inscribed, actively identifying emerging risks to heritage sites, and acting earlier to inscribe and protect sites. Risk profiles can be plotted by measuring impact and likelihood of occurrence against predefined criteria, such as impacts on local and international community, culture, and practices, alongside physical impacts, such as damage to or destruction of sites and artifacts. There are also potential additional criteria that could be incorporated, such as risk proximity, the time frame within which a risk could materialize, and velocity, the time it would take for impacts to be felt should a risk materialize. Actively monitoring these risks would show changes to the risk profile of any given site and allow early action to be taken. While this could seem resource intensive, it could to an extent be mitigated through open communication channels with local communities or through increased use of digital technologies such as the Global Explorer project, which uses satellite imagery which could be used to identify changes to heritage sites, providing an early indicator of inappropriate activity. Moving away from a membership or opt-in approach to cultural heritage protection would be of benefit to enforcing the protection of heritage sites. If we accept that cultural heritage is owned by all of humanity rather than by a single state, then removing the opt-in approach is a logical next step. It would be of value to explore the creation of a supranational body linked to UNESCO and the International Criminal Court without geographic limitations. Finally, strong deterrents should be in place, alongside the will to take action and use these deterrents where risk levels are deemed unacceptable. These deterrents should be aimed at both individuals and states. Individuals could be targeted through increasing resources dedicated to allow the International Criminal Court to pursue more cases generally and more complex cases in particular. And this should be hand in hand with an increased mandate to pursue cases beyond simply member states and irrespective of circumstances in the country in which the issue is occurring. On a state level, supportive states could agree to impose financial sanctions on states causing damage to key cultural heritage, recognizing that this heritage is of concern to all of humanity, with the host state as custodian rather than being owned and controlled solely by the host state. These measures would help to mitigate the risk of temporary government policies causing longer-term damage or permanent loss of cultural heritage by strengthening international response mechanisms. This would enable the international community to reclaim control and protect cultural heritage owned by all of humanity.